Hey guys, kinggath here with Bethesda Mod School, and in this lesson I'm going to show you how to create new perks to add alternate activations to different objects. So in the last guide we went over how to add some functionality to our Deployable Turrets mod, and we made it so that there was a limit of the number that you could place. And if you haven't followed along with that Deployable Turrets mod, that's in the scripts section. It started in Scripting 101 and has continued through each of the scripting videos. And as I mentioned in that first one, it might jump between categories. So if you haven't followed along and you're coming into this fresh, all of these resources, the individual files for each of these lessons, including the source scripts, are included with the Bethesda Mod School resources, which are available on Nexus, and I will have that linked below so you can catch right up if you already know how to script and maybe you just hadn't had a chance to go through all of the tutorials up to this point. So I'm in game because I want to demonstrate what we're about to make change from the last time we talked about something in Deployable Turrets. So if you dropped down your turret before, it would be there, and then if you hit our max, which was 3, there was basically nothing you could do. You couldn't place any more, so we place our 3, and it's already giving away what we're about to change. But when we go to place the last one, it says you have too many turrets deployed, and we can't. So we need a way to deal with that. So there's a couple of things we have to deal with here. One is, if we were to leave the area and lose track of where our turrets were, it could be a real pain in the butt to ever be able to place them again. And so one of the things that I've done is made it so that whenever you leave the area completely, all of these turrets will self-destruct. So that solves one of the problems because I added some code in to detect death and reduce the counter so it knows how many. And well, I'll show you guys how to do all that in a minute. But the perk thing is that I added a pickup option. So now we can walk up to any of our turrets and we can pick them up. And now the on death thing, if you see, if I go ahead and place one of these, if I shoot this thing dead, hopefully it won't aggro on me. I don't think it will. Like, I have it friendly hits ignored. There we go. So that gets destroyed. So one of the things I also had to do with the perk is make sure that we couldn't pick up the corpse because that's still technically the same object. But I also decided I wanted to keep that explosion. I love that. So another way we could have gone with this is to make the turrets repairable, which that might be something that I loop in with a perk tie-in later or something when we get more complex with them on. Because I think I mentioned it several times, I want to keep going deeper and deeper with this. There's all sorts of ideas I've had for it. But I love that explosion animation, and I like the idea of the turret just getting destroyed and you having to make a new one. So we're going to leave that destruction animation in, so the pickup does not work on the body. So now I'm going to show you how to do all this stuff, how to make sure that the counter goes up and down, how you can add the pickup option, and a couple of other little tweaks I added to make all of this work within our existing code. Okay, so we're now in the creation kit. We've got our deployable turrets mod loaded up. Now I've already made these changes so that you guys could see them in the game, and I'm gonna just walk you through how I did these things so that you guys can repeat them yourselves. So we're gonna have to do a couple of things. So first off, we're gonna end up making some edits to our actual turret actor. We're gonna do some changes to our main quest object. We're gonna change 2 of our scripts. We're gonna change our main quest and our deployable turret, and we're gonna create a new deployed turret, which is going to go on the actual actor objects, on the actor bases. And then finally, we're going to create a new perk. So let's start with the perk, since that's what this video is titled after. And to do that, to create a new perk, you just go into the under actors here, click on perk, right click over here and hit new. And then I'm going to end up just creating a dummy perk, and I will delete it before I release this mod, but only because I have to show you guys some important steps. So we're going to just call this one dummy for the sake of it. But when you're doing perks, there are several points where you can crash the CK or create weird behavior. So I found several points where I find it good to just hit OK and save your mod before you continue. So I'm going to show you those now, and that's why I'm going to actually create another one. So you go ahead and give your ID in. You actually don't need the name here unless you want this perk to show up in the player's Pip-Boy. So if you have that, so in this case, I'm going to have this hidden because this is just going to be a functional perk. This isn't going to be one, this is going to be like a background perk, something that just enhances what the player can do, but it doesn't need to show up. You know, I don't need it to say like engineering or something like that for the player. And maybe we do that in the future, but if you wanted to show up in the Pip-Boy, you would do playable, uncheck hidden, and put a name in as well. And that would show up then in the Pip-Boy under the player's perk section, and whatever you have as a description would show up there. So I'm going to leave the name blank because we want ours to be a hidden perk. So we're going to go ahead and hit hidden here. The level and number of ranks is only used if you're integrating with the skill tree, but because of the way the UI works, it's very difficult to do that. Same with these level up menu conditions. I believe with the mod, let me think of it, level up, better level up, I believe that's what it's called. There's a framework mod that I believe the Fallout 4 New Vegas team put together that allows for expanding on the system a little better. And I believe if you're using that, it would take advantage of this stuff. Otherwise, you end up having to kind of hack into the UI to take advantage of these things. So I never bother with this stuff. The sound and the Swift file do work. So this the SWF file you can use to put in an icon that will actually show up in the Pip-Boy if you have yours as unhidden and playable, so that the player can actually see an icon representing your perk. And if you're looking for an example of what that would look like, go check out open up Conqueror, Sim Settlements, the Sim Settlements expansion. It does have a couple of custom perks that actually have flash files. So if you're looking to figure out how to emulate that, you can do that there. So what we're actually interested in here is just this perk entry. So we're going to just check in hidden, leave the name blank, do our custom ID, and we're going to come down to perk entries here. We're going to right click and we're going to hit new. And then from here, we're going to click on entry point and we're going to leave this as activate. And we're going to type in what we want it to say. So in our case, we decided we want it to say pick up, and then we're going to just press OK. Now, normally you could do some other stuff here, but this is one of those points where I find you can end up crashing the creation kit or causing weird oddities. So I like to hit OK here, hit OK again, so that it goes ahead and creates my form, and then I'm going to just save my plugin. So now if we do hit a crash, at least we're backed up to this point. So now we're going to open up our perk back again, and we're going to double click that entry. Then next we're going to do something we did on a previous tutorial about fragments, which is we're going to we're just going to get a fragment created so that we can add, so that we can customize our actual script outside of this window. So we're going to just type in a real basic, just any type of legitimate papyrus fragment. So I like to just declare an integer int I equals 0 works, and we hit compile, and that should compile correctly. And this is once again one of the spots where you're going to hit OK, press OK again, and save once again. So now this you have to do just because the this field here, the advanced stuff, won't actually activate until this fragment is fully saved, and for whatever reason it won't do it until you OK. And it might do it if you OK just out of this first screen, but I tend to I love saving as often as possible in here. It's just a good habit to get into. All right, so now we're going to do what we did in the previous tutorial with fragments, which is to rename our script and make sure we put this inside of our namespace so that we don't lose track of it. So ours is deployable turrets, and then you add the colon there. So this is how you namespace. It's basically namespaces. Again, I've talked about this a couple times, just subfolders effectively for your information as far as you need to know. So we'll do that, the namespace there, hit OK, and then it'll update here in the script name field. All right, so now in our fragment, we're not going to mess with that yet. We're just going to compile it again just to make sure that it updates and has a compiled version in this particular folder. And then we're going to skip the other part for a moment. So next up, we're going to set up our target conditions. So there's two blocks of conditions here. The perk owner would generally be the player most of the time, but if you're going to give this perk for some reason, whatever custom perk you're doing, to an NPC, it would apply to them instead. And then the target is whatever object would get this activation option. So if you leave this blank and we were to go in game, every single thing in the game would have this pickup as an optional activation. But there's a catch with that, and this is very, very important that everybody understand, and this is something that needs to be solved in the modding community, but we need kind of a UI, probably an F4SE expert to solve this. So I haven't been able to do so. But if any object has more than two activation options, and most items have one by default. For example, NPCs have the talk option by default, so that uses up one of those two slots. Most objects that you can interact with, such as chairs, they have one by default, so that uses up one of the slots. So if anything has more than two options, and there are exceptions, there are ways to get a third option in, but for most cases, it's two options are the max that you can have before you run into this issue. None of the options will show up, and instead the object will just only have its vanilla activate option, and then that can even fail to work correctly. So doing this entry point activate is very dangerous, and you should be very aware of the consequences of that, and it will especially cause lots of issues with mod conflicts with other mods that are doing similar things. You'll find that if you try to use mods like Quick Trade and let me think of some more examples. What's your name? And get out of my way, or I can't remember what the shove mod is, but if you use too many of those and you don't have patches for them, you'll find that none of their options tend to work. Same with Conqueror, with soldiers. If you have some of those other mods I just mentioned, your soldiers might not have their activation menu. So it's very good to narrow down this target as far as possible, so that way your thing will only show up on the particular items that it needs to. And this target thing is pretty useful, and this would be a way for compatibility patches to work. It's actually something I need to do for Sim Settlements Conqueror, but anyway, that's besides the point. So we're going to set up some narrow conditions to make sure that our turrets are the only ones that get this pickup option. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to make sure we can't pick up the dead ones. So we're going to go ahead and take care of that. So we're going to change this, and we're going to look for the get dead condition. I happen to know that that doesn't have get is. Again, if you're ever curious about what conditions are available, you can either go search the Creation Kit site, but I recommend searching it under the Skyrim section. So creationkit.com, click on Skyrim and search there. That has all of the condition functions documented, so you can actually get information. Or you can just start filtering for some of the words you know that might be in it up here to get a list. So if I type in dead here, I get a very small list. So we're going to go get dead. And we want this to equal 0. So we want to make sure whatever thing this interacts with is not dead. The next thing that we could check for is if it was this exact form. But we're not going to do that because we actually have to make another change. What we're actually going to end up doing is putting a custom script on this, and there's a method you can check for a specific script. Now we haven't added the script yet in this video, but I already have, so I'm going to go ahead and skip ahead and do that, and I'll show you guys how to add that script, which once I show you the script content. But basically, there's one in here that if we search for script, I believe it's called has VM script. So yeah, has VM script, and then we click on this no script right here, and then click script. We will get our script thing here, and we can search for our particular script that we want. So in our case, I named this deployed turret. I know that it's attached to that form. We're going to hit OK. And so now what's going to happen is only objects that actually have this script attached to them and that are not dead are going to get our pickup option. So that's perfect. That's exactly what we need for this, and that will narrow it down so that it's not going to grab things from other mods, because no other mods are likely to have this particular deployed turret thing. And if they do, well, they probably are integrating with our mod, and we want it to work with them anyway. So it might be that maybe in the future we get rid of this get dead condition. Maybe we want to be able to pick up the broken turret and give a repair option at a workbench or something, but that'll be a future feature. For now, we're just going to say once it's dead, and the player will have to go craft more. So now we're going to hit OK, and we're going to come back and do our fragment in a little bit. And the fragment is what's going to actually do the functionality. So right now, if the player were to pop in game, this pickup option would be there, but nothing would actually happen, because when the actual activate function ran, all that would happen was this papyrus fragment would run that doesn't actually do anything. So we'll double back to that. First, I'm going to go in and show you what the new scripts and what the changes to the existing scripts are doing. So I'm going to go ahead and save this here, and then we're going to bring up our scripts. So there's a few problems that we have to solve. So let's start from the top, and then we'll get to the actual functionality that handles the picking up. So I mentioned that we need to be able to change the number of turrets that the mod thinks are deployed in various situations. So one of those situations was if the turret dies. And so we need to be able to track whether the turret dies. Now, one of the ways we could have done that is in our deployable turret script, which is the one that you drop out of your inventory. We could have registered for a remote event. So we could have said something like, after this turret is created here, we could have said register for remote event, turret ref on death. And then we could have set up, and maybe we do that through our main quest and monitor for the death of the turret and then react. The problem is with these register for remote events is they can sometimes be a little slow. So I don't recommend using them for things that you need to happen fairly quickly. And so something like responding to death and making sure that the player can quickly deploy another turret is going to be one of those things that you're going to want to be pretty snappy, because the player is going to be relying on these turrets in combat. So in that case, you want to find a way to do it more directly without the register for remote events. So events are great, but they're not guaranteed to be particularly snappy, because just by their nature, they're set up to be, and I'm losing a term in my head here, so I'm on the tip of my tongue, but basically they can happen in odd orders, and so things might not happen exactly, asynchronously, that's what I was looking for. It happens asynchronously, so it might not happen in real time from the player's perspective. So to help that happen in more real time, we can put scripts directly on things to make sure they are a little more snappy. So what we're going to do is we're going to put a new script on our turret so that we can monitor for when it dies directly, and then we can decrease this counter ourselves. So what I've created is a new script called Deployed Turret. So we had Deployable, which is the one in your inventory, and Deployed is the one that's already deployed. And you can see I put up at the top, I extended the actor type, and that's because even though technically we could do it as an object reference like we did for this Deployable Turret, if we want access to the on-death event, we need it to be an actor because object references can't die. So fortunately, our turret is an actor type, so that will work just fine. And basically, we have a few things going on here. So I'm going to start with the on-death. In our on-death event, it has one parameter it sends, or one argument, I don't remember which you'd call that, and that is whichever actor killed the particular turret. We don't care, so we're not going to react to that, but you still need to include that in the definition. And then you see that we are calling on our main quest a new function called turret destroyed, which I'll show you that in a minute. So we created a new function in there, and that is so that we can use it in other places, but in particular it's for this. We could theoretically have just said main quest dot the counter and subtracted it, but I actually want it to do a little more, and this gives us an easy hook in the future if we need to react to our turret dying in some way. And so we're going to just go ahead and call a function. And then you see I did a couple of other little things in here. So first off, in order to get access to the main quest, we have to establish it as a property, which we're going to define in the creation kit. And as you guys have seen in my other tutorials, this auto const mandatory basically is what I find the best way to do if we want to define something inside of the creation kit, because the mandatory will remind us by flagging it in red. The const makes sure that it stays the same even if the mod updates in that player's save, and then auto means we don't have to set up getters and setters. So then next we have this form property inventory version. This is something we're going to make use of for our pickup code, so we'll come back to that. And then another two things we have down here. So OnUnload ignore friendly hits. This is something that while setting all this stuff up and testing, I realized that our turrets, if we shot them a couple of times, would turn on us, which we don't ever want. That doesn't feel right. And, you know, if we accidentally get in harsh combat and we hit some of our own turrets while we're fighting, we don't want them turning on us. That doesn't make any sense. They shouldn't have AI programmed like that. So basically what I have it set up is as soon as they load up, they're going to ignore friendly hits. This is a function you can call on any actor to make them ignore hits from NPCs that are in the same faction as them or that are allied to them through the friend of the faction. And our turrets we have set up in the same faction as the player, so this will work just fine, and this will prevent them from ever turning on us. So then we added OnUnload, which means that the player went far enough away from it so that its 3D model wasn't going to be rendered anymore. And like I mentioned in the in-game section, we're going to make it so that the turrets basically just self-destruct if you go away. You could imagine, if you wanted to, that you know, enemy raiders stumbled upon them and destroyed them, and that's why they're not there anymore. So the kill silent, basically, that's going to kill it, and then that will trigger our on-death code, which is what we not want, so that our turret destroyed function gets called. So that's everything that this particular thing is doing. We went ahead and I put it on this turret. If you went ahead and continued this tutorial series and you've enhanced this mod further and you maybe added alternate versions of the turrets, you just make sure you add this on each of them as well. Now it only has the one property, just the main quest, so it was real easy to set up. Another improvement we might make to this to just make this a little easier to manage in the future is, since there's only that one thing on there, and it's unlikely we're going to add more anytime soon, because once we have access to this main quest, this gives us a lot of power anyway. We could theoretically set this thing up to automatically populate this on load, so we can have main quest do a game.getForm from file, and that's something I often like to do on mods that I've released, like some settlements that are a framework, where I don't want to have to force a lot of people who have already released content for it to go back and have to set up these properties, because it's just extra work. And so in that case, I might have done that dynamically, but in this case we haven't released this mod in such a form that we're expecting a lot of people to have modded it, so I'm okay with demanding that they set up this one property for them. It's not really a big deal. Once we get into a large number of properties, then it can be advantageous to set them up to self-populate, and we'll cover that in a future tutorial if I haven't already at this point. All right, so we've got our deployed turret script set up. It's added to our object, which means that now that that extra target condition we added will hold true even in the version you guys have if you're following along. So now our target VM script will be true. All right, so now let's go back into our scripts and let's set up some of these scripts. So in particular, let's set up turret destroyed. So if we scroll down to the bottom here, you'll see I've already written a few new functions here. And I went to the very bottom, turrets destroyed. Basically what we're doing is we're just reducing the counter on our IDeploy turrets. And if we wanted to act and react in some other way, we could here. I don't know how we would yet, but I like having functions just because it leaves us an easy hook to expand on particular events without having to go back and edit a bunch of different scripts. So we're going to decrement our IDeployed turrets counter, which is what's used by CanDeploy turret to determine if it's safe to allow the player to make another one. And then we're going to do a quick test here to make sure that this number didn't go below 0 somehow. Otherwise, it could, if for some reason the scripts got out of order and this ended up at -1, well, then the player would be able to create 4 turrets before this IDeploy turrets was greater or equal to this number, which we know is 3. So this is just like a little safety bit here to make sure, and I recommend you do that anytime you're using counters to count up and down on things that could happen asynchronously, because you never know if your code goes awry or if a player is using a save game editor and happens to cancel a particular script, or a script gets stuck because of some other mod's infinite loop. Basically, you don't want to end up in a situation where you have numbers you're not expecting. So anytime you're adding or subtracting things, in particular subtracting, or if you're adding maybe with a number that could reach some sort of cap, then you should probably check if your number exceeded in one direction or the other, that particular number, and fix it manually right within your function. So that's one half. So the turret destroyed, we're calling that on death. So that's going to guarantee if the turret blows up, we are covered and the player will be able to deploy another one. So then you'll see that there's no mention of pickup turret in here. So we're going to end up doing this function down here. We're actually going to call this from our perk. But before we go back and do that, that'll be the last thing we do, going back into that perk that we were beginning on the perk stuff and ending on it. I want to talk about this extra field here, form property inventory version. So one of the things that we need to do is know that when the player picks up a turret, we need to know which version they get in their inventory, because this actual actor right here is not actually tied to our miscellaneous object in any way other than the fact, and let's go down and I'll show you guys, other than the fact that this has this guy on one of its script properties. But there's no way for this guy to know about this form anymore. Once this one, once this turret here is created into the world from our deployable turret script, so from this script right here, this object, so as you can see here, our object that we dropped actually self-destructs. So this object here that gets created, this deployed turret, our actor, has no idea where it came from. It doesn't know about that. So we need to teach it where it came from, so that way when the player goes to pick it up, we know what inventory item to give back to the player. So on the same vein as talking about minimizing the number of things the potential user of your scripts has to do. Now in most of the cases, it's only going to be you, but I always like to assume maybe it's what's the word? I'm really at a loss for my vocabulary today. Maybe it's gloating. What, I don't know. You guys know what I'm talking about. Yeah, maybe it's being full of myself to say that people would use my scripts, but I just like to future-proof this, especially now that I'm working on a big team and whatnot, and would like to make sure that other people can extend my scripts and make use of them. So I try to minimize the number of these variables where I can. And so in this case, I could set this up, this property inventory version, as another one of the ones, as an autoconst mandatory that's meant to be set up in the creation kit. And then basically whoever was expanding this mod would create a misc object, which would reference the actor base, and the actor base would have to reference back to the miscellaneous object. I don't love that. I like the idea of only having to define it one time and letting the code handle it at runtime. And that way, if, for example, I decide to start tweaking this thing and I point it to another actor, I don't have to remember to come back and change it elsewhere. So it also, on top of making it easier to expand, it also makes it more future-proof from myself so that I don't have to remember to edit things in 2 different places. So it's also future-proofing against myself making mistakes. So what we do, instead of making it a mandatory field that has to be filled out in the creation kit, we're going to set it up as an auto hidden type. And generally what that means is this is a variable you don't want to show up in the creation kit for people to configure, but you do want it to be editable from outside, hence the property and the hidden instead of const. And if you didn't have const or hidden, this would also be available in the creation kit. So by doing hidden, it's just not going to be displayed there, so no one's going to be tempted to pre-configure it. And instead what we're going to do is we're going to configure it at runtime after this thing has been created. So what we're going to do is we're going to make a little edit to our deployable turret script. So we're going to go down here. So after we get to our show turret section, we're going to add a new little segment here. So what we're going to do is we're going to first declare a variable of our script type. And so that's deployable turrets, colon rather, as our namespace, and then deployed turret, that's the name of our new script. And then what I like to do is when I'm casting and I'm just testing a variable, is I just name it as that thing. So this is just my naming scheme. You guys can use whatever you want, but as deployed turret, and then it's going to equal our turret ref. So if we go back and think about our code where we deployed the turret, when we did a place at me, we actually we caught our turret reference. We caught that object reference that gets returned because we needed to set the angle on it and enable it. And now we're also going to take advantage of that. We're going to grab that turret and we're going to try and cast it. And to do a cast, you just do space as space and then the script type that you want to cast it as. Now, what's nice about this is if it turns out that that object doesn't match. So if for some reason, whoever used your scripts set this up, or my scripts, and set up pointing this deployable turret to some other type of turret, it will not try and set this inventory version field, and then won't cause an error. And so we could also have maybe done this at an earlier stage and basically maybe done it up here. And then if this fails, it's not an as deployed turret type, then we could give the player a warning that this wasn't configured correctly, so that whoever the mod author was that was messing with it could go back and fix it and make sure they added that turret. We could do something like that in a debug script. In this case, I'm only concerned with just making sure that the code functions without firing an error. So what we're doing here is we're doing shorthand. So this is if you do an if and test an object reference, basically if this thing exists as you declared it there, then it's going to pass the ifs check. And if this did not cast correctly, so if kTurret ref as deployable turrets failed, which would mean that this reference, this object reference, does not have this script attached to it, this would actually get set to none. So that would be the equivalent. So if this is not true, this would be the equivalent of typing this. And so then when we do an if object reference, or if anything, and it evaluates to none, then that's always going to fail. So if this were none, i.e. This particular thing was not true. So if this turret ref did not have this script on it, then as deployed turret would basically be equal to none, which is going to fail here and not run this. But since we're assuming it passes by putting it in the if block, we're saying that we know for a fact that this object has this script attached. And the reason we set it up as a variable is because we want to be able to access the information on this script. So we can already do that with as deployed turret. So now we're basically going to set that inventory version variable. So we're going to set this inventory version here to ourself, so to this object. So to use an object form of the thing that you're using on, you do self.getBaseObject. And now it doesn't have to be self. Self just means I want it from this particular script that we're sitting in. But getBaseObject used on any object reference. So we are in an extended object reference. So this is our object that we dropped on the ground. So this did become an object ref. But any object reference, if you use getBaseObject, it will return the original form in the creation kit. So it'll return this thing that object reference came from. So in this case, self.getBaseObject means we're grabbing the object, the player that would have been in their inventory, and we're storing it as inventory version on this turret. So as you can imagine, we can now take advantage of that. And then when the player goes to pick it up, we can use this to determine what item should be added to their inventory. So this little chunk right here is all we're adding to our object that had it, or had in our inventory script. And then finally, we're going to go back to main quest, and we're going to talk about this pickup turret function, and then I'll show you how to add it to the actual perk. All right, so pickup turret, we need to know which one we're picking up. So one of the things we could have done here is sent it the deployable turrets deployed turret reference here, and I'll show you why I didn't do that when we get to the perk phase, but it basically just makes the script, the fragment for our perk a little easier. So that's why I opted to just put object reference as the type here. And then we're going to use our same trick I just showed you in the deployable turret script of just casting the object that's sent. So we're taking our parameter here and we are casting it as deployable turrets, and we're making sure that that's true before we try and act on it. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to immediately disable this object. And the reason for that is we don't want the player to be able to spam this. In fact, what I would recommend you even do here would be something like putting in some sort of block here. So what we might do to improve this right now would be there's two things we could do. We could do a state, so we could set up a state to where this couldn't be enacted, but I don't love using states in my main quests where they're going to be complicated, because it can be easy to lose track of what state you're in, or create complex scenarios where it's hard to actually use your script, especially from multiple perk points. And a state, all it does is it allows you to redefine your functions in a different way. So we could blank out different functions if they were in a state. If you want to read more about states, check those out. I tend to not use them a lot because of the potential problems they can cause in my big controller quests, but there are definitely valuable reasons to use them in smaller items. So check those out on the Creation Kit. There's a very good explanation on the creationkit.com site, I should say. There's a very good explanation of states there. So what we're going to do instead is we're going to set up a block variable. So we're going to go bool b pickup turret block. This is just a naming scheme I like to use. And then we're going to do at the top here, we're going to do if b pickup turret block return. So basically we're saying if this is true, if this block is on, and a block is just what I'm calling anything where we're blocking something from happening. So if this is true, just return, don't complete this. It means that there's some other attempt to pick up a turret is in the works right now. So if it's true, then this will return and this function won't run from here. But if it's false, we're going to set it to true. So now we're basically saying if a script makes it to this point, let's make sure that any other attempts to run this function fail, because now they're going to come to here, they're going to run, they're going to get to here, they're going to see it's true, and they're going to return, and they're not going to actually run. So then we avoid the player being able to just quickly spam the button on one turret and get multiple copies for it. And then finally, to free up this function, we need to, at the bottom here, we're going to set this back to false. So this is just a nice little safe blocking mechanism. It's just nice and easy to use. And it should cover 99% of cases where a player might accidentally break through your little barricade and allow themselves to exploit things. Now, generally in modding, I tend to not worry a ton about exploiting, but if it's something easy like this that I can do, I will. And the reason I don't tend to worry about exploiting is because players are modding their games already. They have access to console commands. So if they're going to be digging for exploits, they're kind of ruining their own experience, and you can't really control for that 100% of the time. But little simple things like this I think are worth doing. So there we go. We made a little improvement to it. So now we're coming down here. So we're going to disable that turret, and we didn't use false here. I know I've talked about using false with disable and enable to speed it up, but in this case we're happy if this thing fades away. It'll look a little more immersive. I don't even know if it will fade away naturally because I don't know that actors do, but we're going to just not put the false in there. We're okay if that fades away. Then we're going to grab this inventory version from the properties that we have set. So since this variable here is a property, and this deployable turret would have been set immediately after it was created, so it would have been enabled and then immediately set that, the chances of the player being able to drop the item from their inventory and then immediately click pick up on it before this gets set are pretty slim to none. We could actually create another condition here where it was something like, in fact, we'll just go ahead and do it because it's not hard. But if we do, and this does not equal none. So now we've improved this. So basically what we're doing here is the first time, before you ever check any variable that you know is on a script, you should first test to make sure that that is a valid version of it. And one of the things with the if statements in any evaluation statement in Papyrus, whether it's if or while, is it will short circuit. So if the first thing fails, then it will exit out of that check. So so if this is not an as deployed turret, it's not going to then continue down the line of our and checks in the if, so that way we don't have to worry about this causing an error. So basically we're assuming here if it gets to our second little evaluation here, this little chunk here, then this passed. So we know that this is in fact a deployed turret type. So now we're checking, is this inventory version set? So if it wasn't set, so if it was just like the default, how it is right here, this by default, if this object were dropped into the game, this is equal to none. It's because there's nothing being set here. It isn't set anywhere else. The only place it gets set is if it was dropped in by a deployable turret script. So if by some chance the player is able to drop it and activate pickup turret before this gets set by our other script, then this will just fail out, and it will be nothing will happen when they hit pickup. So there we avoid another little issue. But if instead that is set, we'll go ahead and disable that turret. We will grab the inventory version and put a copy in the player's inventory. Then we're going to call delete on the turret. And the reason we do delete after the fact is we don't want, if we could do delete right after disable, but we don't want to risk it screwing up with the data we have stored in here. I don't believe it does by default. I don't believe delete will affect that until after the area unloads, but just to be certain, I prefer to do my deletes after I'm done accessing the object. So delete's kind of the very last thing I will do on an object. And you only have to do delete on objects that were created by scripts. So if an object was created in the world, yeah, just calling disable is enough and you can just leave it alone, and delete won't actually work on it. Delete is just something you do for cleanup on script created objects, which our turret is because we created it with our deployable turret script. We need to delete that to make sure that it doesn't get stuck in memory forever in the save file. Then next we're going to decrement our turret counter. So we had it done in the turret destroyed. We're just going to copy and paste that code. Realistically, since this is copy pasted, we could take this and make it its own function to be like decrement turret counter or something. I'm not going to get that. I don't anticipate ever changing the way decrementing it works because it's just such a, God, I hope I'm saying, I've never said that aloud. I hope I'm saying decrement correctly and it's not something totally different than I've said it like 40 times in this video. But anyway, we're just gonna put this code in because it's such a short block. I don't anticipate changing it. It could clean up our code. One of the reasons you might do something like that is just to streamline your code and make it shorter. But in this case, I'm not gonna bother with that. And that's it. So now we've got it set up so that the player can pick up the turret. As far as our code is concerned here, it will add the correct item back to their inventory, and then the turret will delete itself, so it's gone. So now the last step here is to actually integrate this with our perk. So we're going to go back into the creation kit. We're going to open up our perk, which I clicked off of there. And we're going to do a couple of things here. So first up is we're going to go to the advanced tab of our perk entry, and we're going to go to edit script. So what we want to do here is we're going to add a new variable at the very bottom here. And this is going to be just a shortcut. We could do this we could sort of do this in the creation kit, but it's just not, it's a little messier. I like to do it in here instead. But what we want is we want access to our main quest so that we can call this pickup turret function from our actual perk. So we're going to just copy and paste this line here. This property works great because we want access to our main quest. So we're going to just copy that and paste it, and then we'll save this file and close out and then head back into the creation kit. And then if we go to Papyrus Fragment and hit compile again, it will recompile with the version that we just saved. And then if we go to properties, you'll see that our main quest is there. We can double click it and then pull that from the options. So now we have access to main quest as a property just with the word main quest, which means we can just grab our function name here. So pick up turret, and we're going to just go and we're going to replace our Papyrus Fragment with main quest dot pickup turret. Now here, this is something that I find truly obnoxious in the creation kit, and this stuff is terribly documented, but there are certain implied variables in every fragment section. So in this particular case, it's AK target ref. And this, I don't know how I know this. I think it's just from looking at Bethesda scripts. My assumption is that there are probably multiple for each of these points where you can do fragments, that there are multiple. Like for example, in dialogue, there's one called AK speaker ref. And I'm assuming there's AK target in that as well. This is one of those things where the only way I've found to learn this is through tribal knowledge, talking to others who have done it, or look through Bethesda scripts, which is a big disappointment to me. This is something that Bethesda should have documented either in the creation kit or on creationkit.com. So if any of you knows of where all of these things are documented, I would love to add that as a resource of all these, what I'm calling like magic declarations. I don't know where to find them. If anybody knows where to, that would be fantastic to know. So, but that is what you can use within a perk is AK target ref, and that is whatever the player activated this particular option on. So now we're saying main quest.pickup turret, AK target ref, and in this case, AK target ref is always an object reference. And like I said, one of the reasons that we did object reference here is just to keep this fragment nice and short. Alternatively, we could have, instead of an object reference type, we could have done deployed turret as our type here, and then we could have got rid of all this casting stuff right here, and then instead just done the casting here. So then we could have done AK target ref as deployable turret, deployed turret. So that is another way we could have gone about it. I prefer to keep as much of the code in my controllers and keep my fragments as minimal as possible, just to avoid any complexity there or having to dig through here, because this screen is miserable to look at, and then instead I've got to open the script externally. I just want to keep this so that at a glance I can see exactly what it's doing in as few lines as possible. That's just a personal preference. Obviously you can do it the opposite way if you prefer. So then we would compile this again, and we are good to go. That is now active. So now there is one last step here that we haven't done yet, and that's that we need to give the player this perk. So just because this perk exists doesn't mean it's going to do anything. We need to give it to the player so that they get access to this option. So we're going to actually take advantage of something we set up in the last tutorial to dump things in the player's inventory, and we're going to take advantage of the way form casting works. So I showed you casting, and now we're going to expand on that. So we're going to go up to our give items on first load. Now, one of the things that we did, and this was just an incidental thing that I hadn't planned in advance, but when I was planning out this particular functionality, I realized we could take advantage of this. Because the type is form as our property here, we can put anything we want in here. It doesn't have to be items that could fit in the inventory. So in this case, we're actually going to just repurpose this to also work for perks. So the way we're going to do that is we're going to come down to our give items on first load, and we're going to do a cast check. So we're going to say, if, and this is one of those points where we could have done it a different way. So let's follow the pattern we've been doing. We're going to do as perk, and we're going to just do the same test we've done several times now. And I'm just going to replace my existing code here. And here we go. So we're going to go, we're going to test, is this a perk? And if it is, we'll just add the perk to the player. So player ref, we know we've had that reference. It's defined in our code. And add perk is the function you call on an actor to give them a particular perk. So if this is a perk, we'll add it to the player as a perk. Otherwise, we'll assume it's an item and we'll give it to them. And so we could actually take this give items on first load and extend it in the future. Maybe if we wanted to add spells or equip some items, or there's various like actual equip items, like give them a weapon, put it in their hand or something. Maybe we could expand on that and do that sort of thing in the future. But this is one of those things we can get clever with stuff we've already got in place so that we don't have to have a separate section for perks. And what we might do here is to make sure this is clear, add any items / perks, so we can update our documentation. So that way in the future, if people are messing with our code, that they will know how that's going to work. So now that was easy. We didn't have to add any complicated game detection. We just took advantage of what we've already got configured and just tied into that by doing this. And I kept scrolling past it as perk. So now when the player starts the game, they will get the perk, and that is because I defined it here. And so I guess I should show you guys that too, so you're not wondering why it's not working for you if you followed along. But basically I added the perk here, and to show you what that would look like if we did add here and we selected perk from our list, select perk, and then we'll filter for our prefix. And you can see there's our KG dummy, for example. Now you'll notice I moved, when I added a new one, it was at the bottom and mine is up at the top. I moved that up there because I assume I'm gonna want that forever. Whereas these, I'm only leaving here while we're testing, and then eventually I'll remove those. So I moved that up to the top just so I remember that that's gonna be one I keep forever. And if I decide to add more, I'll keep doing that of pushing the temporary ones to the bottom. That's just a personal thing I'm doing to keep track. You guys don't have to do that. It doesn't really matter. So there we go. So that is how you can take advantage of your controller quests, how you can use perks to add new activation options. And like I said, be careful with activation options. They're a very powerful feature, but they have a very strong potential for mod conflicts, and often you'll end up having to patch them. And the way you end up having to patch those is kind of complicated. You basically have to create a patch mod that uses both of your mods as a parent, and then you would edit your perk and add some sort of, you'd either edit your perk or you would edit the other mod's perk, and you would add some sort of target condition. So for example, what I might do if I wanted to prevent another mod from activating this is I might put this function, this has VM script deployed turret, and I would change it to =0, but put it on the other mod's perk test. So that way theirs would only show up if it didn't have this. Like that's one way you could go about doing that is to basically patch in theirs as a requirement of your mod, and then put in some sort of negative requirement on their perk activation. So that's how you can deal with that. But ideally, we would see in the community somebody would create some sort of menu system that would pop up if too many perks we're trying to add activation options and solve that, maybe that's something that will show up in the community eventually. But for now, just be aware of that. All right, guys, hopefully that was useful to you. I apologize for all my vocabulary slip-ups and pauses. Like I mentioned in a few other videos, I am so strapped for time anymore that unfortunately I cannot keep redoing these videos to polish them up, and hopefully I gave you guys enough good information to make up for that.